I'd like to thank everyone for joining what is the fourth of 5 segments in the McLean Group Summer Speaker Series. My name is Mitch Martin. I am part of our firm's transaction advisory practice. Today I think we have a fantastic panel, and really the topic that we have is venture capital and market opportunities in the multi-int ecosystem. And I think the folks here, again, sort of really interesting companies, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. I'm going to let everybody sort of introduce themselves, but just to open it up, we've got Joe Murray from Blue Force Technologies, John Serafini from HawkEye 360, Mark Spoto from Razor's Edge Ventures, and Stephen Witt from anno.ai. We're going to go ahead and jump right into the discussion. The plan will be to record this so that if you do want to access it on the website, on the firm's website later on, you will be able to as well. So with that, let me go ahead and get started. And I'd like each panelist to maybe provide a bit of an introduction, a background, to talk for a couple minutes about their company and products, and specifically touch on innovation and in the areas of data fusion where we're the market leader. And maybe to kick off, I'll let Stephen kick us off.
Thanks, Mitch. So Stephen Witt, I'm CEO of anno.ai. We're a AI company based in Reston, Virginia. We're about 3 years old at this point. And the company was originally created to focus on sensor fusion opportunity being enabled by machine learning technology as it had started to mature. So we really focus on something called re-identification, which leverages machine learning to be able to track unique individual vehicles, objects, or people as they move through urban environments. And that tends to lend itself to using a sensor fusion approach, which means as a person, vehicle, or object moves through a geography, you're able to uniquely identify them, whether it's through acoustic data, video data, infrared data, if it's using ground-based cameras, UAVs, orbital assets. And over the past few years, we've really scaled the company, starting with working with the U.S. government and the defense sector. And here over the last year, we've expanded that into law enforcement agencies in the United States, and then started working with commercial companies and some foreign governments overseas as well.
That's fantastic. And Stephen, maybe if you could also just touch a little bit on your background, because obviously you've been both on the government and commercial side, and I think have a pretty unique perspective on some of these markets.
Sure. So I spent the bulk of my earlier part of my career in the Director of Science and Technology at the CIA. And after leaving the agency about a decade ago, I've started 3 companies. The first one was actually based around some open source technology from the NSA, which was open sourced as Apache NiFi. And that company was acquired later by Hortonworks and is now part of Cloudera. In 2015, I started a fund with a couple of other partners called Data Tribe, based in Maryland, which was focused on commercializing a lot of the really unique mission innovation that was happening within the intelligence community and Department of Defense, and looking for commercial opportunities to scale those companies. And then here about 3 years ago, decided I wanted to do another run as an operator of a technology company.
Fantastic. Now, thanks so much. Maybe if we go to next, John Serafini, if you could maybe give a little bit of your background and talk about HawkEye 360.
Sure. Well, thank you, Mitch. Nice to be with you guys. I'm John Serafini. I'm the CEO of a company named HawkEye 360. We've been around for about 6-7 years. We founded the company really focused on building a constellation of small satellites that uniquely fly in clusters of 3 in order to detect, process, geolocate, and analyze RF signals. So effectively, any signal above a watt in power between 150 megahertz and 18 gigahertz from space, low Earth orbit, we can detect it, we can process, and eventually turn that RF data into an actionable insight about the world around us. And RF is unique in that it's a telltale sign of human behavior and human intention, human activity. For our focus is on capturing that data, converting it into something that's usable through the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence, but also through the fusion of other modalities like electro-optical and synthetic aperture radar and open source data. We built the company principally around three pillars. Pillar one was that we want to control the full value chain of our ecosystem. So we didn't want to just be a collection agent of a unique data source. We also wanted to do the processing and the data analytics and the data fusion and eventually convert that into a shrink wrap product that would be delivered on a subscription basis to our customers throughout the entire value chain. The second piece is that we recognize that the biggest buyer of remote sensing data and data analytics is really the US government. And that companies that sell to the US government really need to focus on that and make it their core competency to be successful in selling to the US government. So we built our company truly with the DNA to be successful in selling to government organizations within the intelligence community and the Department of Defense and the security ecosystem, et cetera, and their international equivalents around the world. But that takes a special type of company, and it requires you to build the right infrastructure with the right people and, again, the right DNA. That was the second pillar. The third was that in order to be able to execute on these missions and to service those customers that I just mentioned, you need a service-minded workforce. You need individuals who understand what it's like to wear a uniform. And I say that word uniform broadly. It could be people who have served in the military. It could be folks who have been in government. It could have been individuals who have worked in the defense industrial base or been a staffer, et cetera. We just look for people who have served their country. And so today, well over 50% of HawkEye has done that. And we think it helps contribute to the DNA that makes us a very positive place to work. My background as a U.S. Army infantry officer, a West Point graduate, for about 12 years, I served as a venture capitalist focused on national security oriented technology companies in the C4ISR domain. In that service, I was able to start 10 different companies. Many of them spun out of places like Los Alamos National Labs and Johns Hopkins APL and other places, and convert those raw ideas, similar to what Stephen was mentioning earlier with Data Tribe, into actionable companies that could be scaled with value add venture capital such as that provided by Mark at Razor's Edge. So I consider myself part of this little ecosystem of friends that we have collected here. Thank you.
Fantastic. Hey, thanks so much. And maybe moving to Joe, maybe again, just talking a little bit about Blue Force Technologies and your background. We've obviously known each other a long time. And I think, as you mentioned, you're a little bit on the other side of sort of the data fusion discussion, but I do think, I think it's very interesting commentary as far as having the platform and carrying the payload.
Sure, thanks, Mitch. So I'm one of the two primary owners of Blue Force. I did not start the company. My colleague, Scott Bledsoe, he was the founder of the company in 2011. We actually met because he had built a radome for a radar system we were building back many years ago, which is now actually being deployed on many surface Navy vessels. My background is actually data fusion. My last company is pretty much all we did was multi-sensor data fusion systems and very rapid development. But in 2017, I had the opportunity to buy out one of the partners in Blue Force and help Scott Bledsoe to kind of transition the company. So Blue Force is a aerospace design and manufacturing company. Scott came out of some other aerospace industry, worked Gulfstream, worked Scaled Composites, worked actually for the Navy before that. And one of the things that was missing from the industry was a very high quality defense and aerospace specialized company that could not only rapidly build a very high quality prototype system, but could transition that to LRIP and full rate production effectively without going back to the drawing board and starting over. So Scott had developed that capability originally starting out with Boeing as kind of a very small tier one provider, helping them introduce new technologies like out of autoclave composites, things of that sort. Built up a base of series production types of activities, specifically H47. They've delivered over 350 ship sets of various composite components for H47. But then in about 2017, we decided, when I came on board, Scott and I decided that we really wanted to pivot the company into some more strategically aligned capabilities, building our own products, advancing our own team. So we then started to look at a couple of strategic markets. One was the emerging eVTOL market that was kind of enabled by distributed electric propulsion. And that was really focused on providing aerospace structures to those companies. So kind of a provider of their airframes as opposed to a provider of maybe motors or inverters or batteries or technologies like that. The second one was to pivot specifically to our own product area, but to truly disrupt the market and go after that product area in a way that the traditional OEMs do not. The traditional OEMs kind of have a control of the platform. And what we wanted to do is to create an open architecture platform where companies like some of the folks we're talking to today could bring technology and integrate it into the aircraft, specifically data fusion systems, multi-sensor intelligence gathering capabilities into the aircraft. Our opportunity presented itself through a small little baby phase 1 SBIR, the opportunity to spend $250,000 and get $50,000 pay for that. But we created a concept called unmanned adversary air. So adversary air is the function where we train our US pilots to engage with enemy fighters or enemy aircraft in a kind of a red v blue configuration. So it might be some 5th generation US fighters, F-22s, F-35s, a few or a small group of them against many foreign fighters in a beyond visual range engagement. And that is an extraordinarily expensive proposition. In fact, in 2020, on the F-22 side alone, the Air Force has spent $335 million flying F-22s on the red side. That's pretty expensive. And we're only meeting about 30% of the requirement, the amount of vehicles and capability we need. So we actually created a vehicle. The vehicle is based on a business jet engine, and it has a completely open architecture payload bay and an open architecture mission system. So in that mission system, we can host any autonomy framework. And in our payload bay, we can host a broad range of different sensor systems, whether it's EA systems, AESA systems, other systems. But the most important disruption is that where it costs $50,000 to $100,000 a flight hour to fly an F-22 or an F-35 or a contractor on the red side, we can now do that for about $4,000 a flight hour. And so that concept that we developed has now resonated, and we have a lot of support throughout the Air Force, and we're winning a lot of support in the Navy and the Marine Corps and other places as well. So right now we have a contract that is to build the first 4 aircraft. They will not have payloads. They'll be kind of lead nose aircraft, as they're called. But aircraft 3 and 4 will be ready for payload systems. And a lot of the major primes who build advanced sensor systems, and even some small innovative companies who build some autonomy systems and data fusion systems, are very interested in hosting that capability in our platform, which we are going to provide as an open architecture framework that they can host anything they like without having to come through the OEM to do that.
Fantastic. No, that was a great overview. Thanks so much, Joe. And then we'll definitely want to circle back. Maybe kind of rounding out this initial set of questions, Mark, if you could talk a little bit about Razor's Edge Ventures and obviously kind of being born out of Blackbird Technologies. I think, maybe many of the topics that we're talking about, you guys have deep expertise in, but maybe providing an overview and talking a little bit about some of your investments that are relevant to data fusion.
Yep, happy to do it. Thanks, Mitch. Appreciate you having me on the panel, and great to be here. So Razor's Edge, for people that don't know us, my partners and I started this fund about 12 years ago. We have 3 funds we're managing right now, about $600 million of assets under management. We've invested in 25 or 26 companies over that time frame. Razor's Edge, the idea was generated out of experiences my partners had starting and running a company called Blackbird Technologies, which for many years was a leading technology provider for some of the most elite customers across the Intel community, special ops community, DoD, and others. We have a real long history of building, investing in, helping to grow companies with technologies in this area of data fusion. In many of those cases, the customers for these businesses are just as the other guys have mentioned here, a lot of government agencies. Again, the same kinds of folks, that John or Stephen or Joe is selling to, are the same folks that our portfolio companies are focused on. Our fund, is really focused on national security oriented technologies, broadly speaking. So data fusion is one key area for us. Cybersecurity is another. Autonomy, alternative forms of manufacturing, a host of other areas, again, that all align with where our national security priorities and strategies are. That has evolved over the last 12 years, of course. When we started our first fund, the key priority area was the war on terror. And fortunately, we have kind of moved past that, and we're now in this great power competition. And so there's a whole host of other technologies that really, become strongly applicable, to those kinds of situations. And so this area of data fusion, is really, a key part of our current strategy. We've got several companies in the current portfolio that play in this marketplace. I've been fortunate to work with John for several years now on HawkEye 360, and have been thrilled to work with John and his team, helping them grow that business. We were also early investors in a company in Herndon called Black Sky, which does optical imaging with a really robust AI platform underneath it. That company went public via SPAC about a year ago. Another company participating in this kind of space-oriented data marketplace is called Ursa Space. And their claim to fame focuses around SAR kinds of data. SAR is synthetic aperture radar. Synthetic aperture radar is a really interesting type of data that you can collect that, as opposed to optical imaging, SAR can see through clouds, can take images at night. So you can imagine, the use cases for SAR are much broader than even optical imaging might be. We invested in a company called Blacklinks, which was sold about a year ago to Jacobs. And Blacklinks built an edge processing platform that took a lot of different data sources and applied AI algorithms to them, and brought those direct to, folks on the ground, warfighters, et cetera, in a much more expeditious manner. We've invested in Altamira, which does a lot of air and space related intelligence, several others as well. And so you can kind of hear there's, overhead kinds of data that we're working with, optical, SAR, RF. We work with open source kinds of intelligence data sources, right? That might be social media, news, et cetera. Other kinds of cyber and IoT data, aerial data, and all of these things are being pulled together by several of our portfolio companies and delivered to customers, across the world.
Fantastic. And that's helpful. And I think some of your comments, and we might circle back, and, you mentioned sort of the change in the threat landscapes, and certainly since you started the fund and where we are today, I think also, given, the very obvious market headwinds that we're seeing right now, would love to circle back and just talk a little bit about how that's, shaping shaping or changing your investment philosophy and how you guys are approaching the market. But maybe before doing that, I had a question for Stephen, and would love to get John's feedback as well. John when we started out, made the comment about just not wanting to be sort of a data warehouse or a data aggregator, kind of controlling the value chain. I know with many of our clients, there's always, certainly when we think about strategic growth, there's always sort of a push and pull with data fusion between sort of ingest, bringing in more different types of data sources and sort of capability around specific data sources. And would love to get kind of your comments and maybe Stephen talking about growth plan. Obviously, you guys, do a lot with video and with very certain types of data. But as you think about growing and expanding, how do you think about that trade-off? And then would ask the same of John as well.
Yeah, so there's an important point about machine learning and sensor fusion, and it has to do with something called parallel collection. And that is, you need to collect on the target with multiple different sensor types at the same time, so you can start building a machine learning model that's effective at then re-identifying the target when you only have one of those sensors available. So I didn't fully appreciate this a few years ago, just how important the insight that John and the HawkEye team had with RF data for machine learning. And that is, its pervasive and global coverage unlocks a lot of really important machine learning use cases around sensor fusion. And when you combine the HawkEye approach with RF collection, with global RF collection, with the increasingly pervasive EO collection that we have in space, it's really a superfood for building fantastic multi-int fusion models using machine learning. So in terms of scaling for us from a business perspective, we really look for that technical advantage, which has to do with pervasive collection of multiple sensor types. And that tends to lend itself to imagery or video combined with RF data being the absolute key fundamental building blocks for doing sensor fusion at any kind of scale. And maybe John has something to add to that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Stephen. Kind words. I think we look at data fusion a bit like a potluck supper where you got to bring something to the table. And for us, it's the RF data. Clearly, we know how to build spacecraft, operate RF sensing spacecraft, and then process that data. And I think looking at the remote sensing phenomenology ecosystem, it's difficult to contemplate being a pure play sensor fusion company unless you bring your own data source to the table. So for us, it's about RF, and we built this company to have a head start. We're very fortunate to get a multi-year jump on our competitors and be able to get to 5 clusters on orbit today with another 15 or so under development, which will get us approaching about 10 minutes of revisit rate than you were on Earth. There'll be an RF sensing cluster of satellites identifying signals. So for us, it really starts about having a unique, defendable data source that we deeply and innovatively understand and convert into actionable insights. That's kind of step one for us. Step two is, before we get into all the data science and the ML AI of how we can convert this actionable data into something that's usable, it's about orchestrating multiple different modalities together. So in space today, you have electro-optical, you have synthetic aperture radar, you have hyperspectral, multispectral, thermal, and of course you have commercial RF, and there's a host of other different payloads. Some of them are in the classified domain, some are in the commercial. But the key, ultimately, from my perspective, is not the company that's going to have the world's best EO constellation or the world's best RF or the world's best SAR constellation. But the eventual winner in the remote sensing universe is the company that's going to be able to fuse all these different modalities together at very fast rates of speed through low latency tipping and queuing. And that means having the on-orbit processing, and even more importantly, having the right ground infrastructure and crosslinks infrastructure in order to be able to work with other satellites, be it government, commercial, or others, or international. For us, as an RF sensing satellite, what we're really good at is being a scout, right? So electro-optical satellites tend to look down through a straw. They can only see a very small amount of landmass at any given point in time. It's difficult to know exactly where to take a picture. So for us, we're out sensing RF signals, again, a marker of human activity, eventually human behavior and intention. We can then tip and cue to other satellites to say, hey, when you come over this lat long, take an image. That could be us over the Galapagos, right? And identifying illegal fishing inside the Ecuadorian economic exclusion zone. It could be monitoring a country's borders and identifying troops massing on that border. Regardless, what we do is we let other satellites know so they can come take an image. Then we can take steps afterwards to start to fuse those different modalities together to create an analytic report that has greater validation and legitimacy, and ultimately can be used not only for interdiction, but also for prosecution, particularly in the case of some of these environmental challenges, humanitarian challenges, like illegal fishing and poaching, strip mining, et cetera. So that gives you a sense of how we look at data fusion. It starts with having something that's really defendable from a unique data perspective, and then being able to work with multiple different modalities seamlessly up in space.
Oh, that's fantastic. And Joe, I'd be curious, just kind of building off of that. And you mentioned sort of, you've got sort of a very unique perspective in that you started out your previous company, 3 Phoenix. You were building radar, sonar. I remember towed array. Kind of go down the list. But I think data fusion, as you mentioned, was at the center of what you were doing. Now you're sort of, you're building aircraft, and effectively aircraft that are conducive to very specific payloads and very specific missions. As John mentioned, they view a big part of sort of HawkEye 360's job as sort of this tipping and queuing. But as you think about, some of the UAS platforms that are either in development or what you're looking at, maybe talk a little bit about what are the types of payloads that you would put on those, and what are the types of missions that you would foresee those being used for, and what is the right mix, of EO and SAR, and maybe just give a little bit of a class on that.
Sure. It's kind of fascinating from the standpoint, where I come from, really in the electronics and the embedded world, to kind of flip to the other side where it's kind of more platform centric. One of the things that we discovered when we first started going down this path is that there are a lot of really, really capable sensor system manufacturers and autonomy systems, AI, machine learning companies who can get to a point and they have no place for their equipment to go. They're stuck. They don't have a platform to ride on. The people who control the platforms control with kind of an iron fist. And so it's kind of fascinating to hear all these various technologies that have a role. Blue Force is a little bit, I don't know if I would characterize it as serendipity or vision. I would hope the latter, but I think the reality is maybe it was just a little bit of luck. They happened to develop a digital workflow for aircraft design, the flight sciences, all of the things that are necessary to do kind of the Mach 0.7 to Mach 4 aircraft design development. And they also developed an advanced rapid prototyping system, and they coupled those together. They didn't do that I would like to say they did it out of brilliance, but the fact of the matter is they did it out of a necessity to be competitive in the marketplace when lots of different people show up and want lots of different things. So really what we did was we developed this capability to cut about 2 to 3 years out of the development timeline, and we've used it very successfully in the commercial space. When we pivoted to this role, our initial focus being a swim lane that was effectively neglected by the major primes. You can see a lot of unmanned UAS out there flying, lots of interesting things, or a lot of times they're very expensive vehicles. We found this niche that all the other guys said, ho-hum, who cares? Let those little guys go chew on that. But it turns out it's a major activity. One of the things that we did was we designed the aircraft to meet a very relevant performance point. So it is a 5th generation signature aircraft. So it means it has the characteristics that are important in those communities, which are relevant to our threats now. And it has the performance characteristics of a F-16. So we can get up to 30,000 feet and we can sustain a Mach 0.9 3G turn indefinitely, so non-energy depleting. So that's a pretty high performance aircraft running on a business jet engine. But the real key enabler was that we divided the aircraft kind of into 2 classes of functionality. There was the aircraft organic functionality, which is where we map kind of the digital world into the physical world. How do you make an aircraft, cut a 7G turn? How do you do a -2G maneuver, whatever those things are? So that is where we very, very tightly control and have an open interface to it. And then we have an open architecture mission computer that's largely undefined. It's open real estate for companies that build autonomy or machine learning systems, things of that sort. And then the final part is the whole front 1/3 of the aircraft is removable. So our vision is we will build 1 aircraft, but we might build 3 or 4 or 5 payload bays. And those things may be shipped off to companies that can integrate very unique capabilities into them. And we, as the manufacturer, given our model-based systems engineering approach, we can hand them a data package, hand them the CAD, and they can integrate their capability, potentially at a security level that we don't have the right tickets to access, but they can integrate it, and then in a hangar, it can be brought together and it can go fly without necessarily the OEM being invasively involved with it. Of course, we'll support, and of course, it's going to be a growing environment, but the idea is we have that. And we offer a very large payload bay. We can carry 400 pounds. We can provide a lot of power. Right now we're budgeting a minimum of about 20 kilowatts of power in the payload bay. And we have a lot of IO and thermal cooling. So we can support a lot of sensors, as well as the edge processing systems that are necessary to kind of feed into that mission computer element. It's very interesting because the payload bay has become the true enabler for this. We have now talked to several large and small companies, companies that are attracting a lot of venture capital investment right now, who are very interested in integrating their capabilities into the mission computer and the payload bay. And we've got things like IRST modules, AESA radars. We've got some truly innovative, very wideband, kind of the 500 megahertz or even lower up to well over 18 gig kind of EA function with DERFM. All of that can be integrated up into the payload bay. And so that coupled with the data links and the mesh networking capability and the precision PNT links between these aircraft, you can kind of result in a cluster, very low cost cluster of aircraft that carry a diversity of payloads. So we can put a lot of different things in different vehicles. So you may have 2 or 3 vehicles out there flying all passive, collecting, processing in real time with quite a substantial amount of onboard processing. And they are interlinked to a couple of sensors or a couple of aircraft that may be a little more vulnerable because they're out there actively lighting people up. So they may be a little more vulnerable in the kill chain, but that data is shared back and the passive receivers can then use that data fusion capability across a group of aircraft. So it is, right now, as I mentioned, there are a lot of companies who have come to us that are very interested in our kind of open architecture payload bay because they would like to integrate their things. But we've covered, I think, at least 7 or 8 different types of sensor systems, including people want to put on the hard point. They want to put SAR radar, for example, to it seems mundane, but in some of these ranges, they have to go out over the water and they have to clear the space before they can go out and run a high-speed exercise, right? It seems very mundane, but they want to put a SAR radar pod on the wing, let these unmanned aircraft go out, clear the space, and once they have it all clear, then bring out the fight. So it's very interesting, all the variety of payloads and the variety of capabilities we want to bring to these aircraft.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that's fantastic. And I'd be curious, and Mark, I definitely wanted to get to this. obviously we've talked about the sensor, we've talked about sort of the, the platform, the data fusion and the AI ML capabilities to sort of, assess these various information ingest. What, as you think about, and again, just wearing sort of the venture capital hat, but would love to get everybody's comments, as you think about where data fusion is going and sort of you think about the investment opportunities going forward, are there specific areas that are sort of more interesting than others, or how do you think about your investment thesis?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was thinking about this question, and here's what I'd say about it. Everybody on this call, I'm sure, has heard this expression that was real prevalent here for a while, which is data is the new oil, right? We've all heard that. We all probably have a good idea of what that means. There's tons of value in data out there. And so we're in a place where it turns out data is not like oil, in that we have lots and lots and lots of data right now. Obviously we'd all like there to be more oil. I won't go down that rabbit hole. There's lots of data, and the world probably doesn't need another data source, at least right now. There's always new technologies that come online that, are interesting ways of collecting some kind of information. That information may be actionable. If it's not actionable, it's not valuable. Basically, for this data to be valuable, I mean, I would say there's like 4 or 5 key things that increase the value of that data. And this is true across different enterprise architectures, right? The data has to be, and a lot of this has to do with timeliness. Data has to be collected in either real time, near real time, or it has to be timely. And again, depends on the application. It has to be processed in that same kind of time frame. It has to be delivered to customers. You can't do the first 2 things if it doesn't get into a customer's hands in a time frame where they can actually do something about it. It has to be delivered in a way that that information is somehow actionable. And it has to somehow be delivered in a way that it can easily fit within a customer's enterprise architecture. There are so many opportunities in the 5 things I just talked about. From an investment perspective, John and I work all the time about the fact that he's developed this wonderful, unique RF data source that is getting fused together with other modalities. We have, countless customers very engaged with us. And the one thing they say to us all the time is, this is great. Now I need you to get it to me so that it is under 5 minutes of latency. That's a tall order, right? And again, when you talk about satellite architectures, we could be talking about aerial architectures like Joe uses. There are other data, gathering techniques. Stephen is very experienced in all those things. But I mean, people want this stuff basically now. You think about that across the financial enterprise, system. It's not now, it's not valuable. Oil, energy, that market, it's the same. Healthcare, you could talk about when is information valuable. So I look at those 5 things, and for us, that kind of helps guide us around our data fusion related investment activities right now, because those are things that can clearly be improved upon.
Yeah.
I'll add a little more if I can, Mitch, to
Absolutely.
Mark's good answer here. And for us, particularly internationally, it's also about how the data is delivered in a way in which is going to be most usable to them, but also fits within their clearance and classified data infrastructure, right? Some customers want to be able to do the processing and the data science work themselves because of the nature of the work that data is relevant for. And so in that case, how do you provide the customer with the greatest chance to create maximum value from your data without necessarily putting yourself in the critical path. And that is creating toolkits that you're able to license to the customer, training that you provide to the customer, and in many cases, training the individuals and the analysts of the host nation to be capable of converting what is complex and a mammoth amount of RF data, processing it, analyzing it, and then eventually putting that into something that's digestible by their existing systems. When we talk about a first of its kind commercial offering, like what HawkEye has, and customers internationally who have never had access to high quality commercial RF before, it's a really fascinating paradigm where flexibility is absolutely the operative word, where our product line has to be flexible enough to adjust to multiple different types of intake environments at the customer site.
Mitch, I would just add to Mark and John's comments here about making the data readily accessible to the analysts in a consumable format. When we go back to the beginning of the discussion around like how sensor fusion is scaling, this is one of the areas that kind of surprised us, that we found a lot of customer uptake the last 2 years using sensor fusion, and that's taking things like SAR data or infrared data, and then using a machine learning technique called GANs to convert it into a different data format, in this case, typically EO data, which is something that's easy for an entry-level analyst to understand. It's a picture. So if you can take really complex sensor data, like SAR data, which typically takes months, potentially years of specialized training to interpret, and put it into another data type that they're familiar with and understand, it unlocks the timeliness aspect that Mark was speaking to, and thereby increases the overall value of your sensor constellation that you've already deployed. And that's where we've seen a lot of really quick uptake from customers, is using machine learning techniques to take sensor data and essentially translate it into a different format that's easier to consume.
That's fantastic. I'd be curious too, and we've touched on sort of the customer relationship in this last conversation. I know with some of our clients, there tends to be sort of two components there worth mentioning. One is you talked about education. I think obviously the desire for many companies in this sector is sort of a SaaS model or selling something off the shelf. I think with what we've seen with many customers is really you're putting analysts in place to help them do that, or you're delivering more of a finished, call it intelligence product as opposed to raw data. Would love to get kind of just comments on your experience in general. And the other thing I've heard, and I don't know what you guys would think or how true this is that sort of data fusion can be tough to sell into customers, just because that's not necessarily how customers are aligned. They might have, NRO might have a different mandate than DoD or something like that, and they have a certain lane, and sort of bringing other data sources in, or that can sort of gum up what they're doing. Again, just curious what your experience has been with both of those. For anybody, John, I don't know if you.
Well, I think we've recognized the adage of crawl, walk, run, right? And the crawl of our development is being the very best at collecting RF and processing that RF data with the right revisit rates. As Mark points out, we're trying to get sub 10 minutes worth of revisit rate, which is a significant amount of CapEx and an awful lot of assets on orbit. But that's step one. Step two is being able to kind of draw insights on the RF piece itself, which we can look at RF pattern of life analytics and how does different signals change over time depending upon the behavior of the object, be it a vehicle or a vessel or a military entity, et cetera. And then step 3 is you start to really work that data fusion part where it's not just the RF profile of that object, but you're also looking at the imagery and open source data about it as well. You know, it's a vessel, it's information about the captain, the crew, it's different logs, it's who's the equity owner, et cetera. All of allows you to start to forecast out where that vessel will be in the future and what kind of illicit activity it might be engaged in. So for our customers, if you principally think about the U.S. government today, we're moving towards programs of record on commercial RF. And that's a new phenomenology, never before done commercially, and matches what's been done in the EO and the synthetic aperture radar world. But it's a big step forward for the government to get to programs of record on RF. Programs of record and new operational deployments of technologies where you're fusing together multiple different modalities and you're converting that with ML into actionable insights. Those programs of record are to come. They're in the future. And so the question becomes, when do you start to really invest the capital internally, your organic dollars, to build towards those realities for the future? And for us, our focus today is on making sure we can execute against the commercial RF programs of record while preparing our product line to be successful with the fused data analytics of the future. But we recognize that you can only push the U.S. government to go so fast, and it's best to let that organization develop towards that end goal on its own timeline. So we'll be ready if they're ready.
Yep, that makes perfect sense.
I would just build on John's comments by saying it's not about selling sensor fusion into the market. You really need to focus on, as John was alluding to, the end use cases and the unique analytics that you can extract from that mission capability. So where we focused is understanding the part of the market where there is pervasive sensor coverage that unlocks sensor fusion use cases that can deliver unique mission capabilities that haven't been there before, or are far more economical than were possible under legacy type approaches. And the hope and expectation over time is that the world becomes increasingly saturated with different sensor types that'll unlock more and more unique mission capabilities using the sensors combined with machine learning techniques.
Yeah.
And again, it's not about selling against sensor fusion. It's really focusing on unlocking new mission capabilities.
Yeah, mission. That makes perfect sense. Great. Well, want to be mindful of time, and I think we have time for one more question, and didn't intend to end this on any sort of negative note, but maybe just circling back to Mark and talking a little bit about the outlook for venture capital and obviously entrepreneurs. And here we're talking about sort of in these markets, clearly going out and raising capital today probably looks different than it did a year ago. And maybe you can touch on that a little bit, where you see the differences and where you see, as entrepreneurs are preparing to go out to market and raise. How should they be thinking about that? Is there anything they should be doing different this time around?
Sure. Yeah, look, my opinions on this are not fully aligned with probably the messages you hear pervasively in the market these days. Clearly, the market is more challenged right now from a raising venture capital perspective than it was 6 months ago. Those of us who have been around for the number of years we've all been around know that these things come in cycles, and things can look dark and then they quickly look really bright. And I will tell you my 2 cents on the grim nuclear winter of venture capital. You've got to be prepared to weather 2 or 3 years worth of terrible market. I think that's wrong. I think we're going to face a 6 to 12 month period where it's going to be a tough market. but there's been too much capital raised by too many funds. That capital is going to need to get put to work. There is a ton of innovation still happening. I'm a strong believer that good businesses will get funded. You may have to be a little more accommodating on the terms, but those good businesses will get funded. There's capital that will find homes in good businesses. The days of businesses where, hey, look, we're talking about building something great and don't worry, we think there's a huge market. We're not tied up with any customers yet, but it's going to happen. Like, those are going to be hard to fund. We just had our LPAC meeting today. One of our LPAC members said, yuck companies, are going to have a real hard time. I love this term. Yuck is young, unprofitable companies. Companies that have high burn rates, where, again, you don't see a path to profitability, you're going to struggle right now. But again, I go back, all the companies here on this call, I'm fortunate to be able to say, they've got strong backing, strong businesses. They're going to get funded. We're specifically in the national security market. Of course, the world is a more dangerous place than it was a few years ago. The budgets are growing. All of the things we're investing in are in key strategic areas. So for us, we're very much open for business right now.
That's great. Any final comments? Again, I think we're up on time, but if anybody has any final comments on the topic,
Yeah, I'll just to kind of bear it on Mark. We as a company that has been a going concern for 11 years, often when you're looking for external investment to accelerate, they always look at you as, oh, you're a going concern, you have EBITDA, you have this great base of customers, let's look at a valuation based on kind of a traditional methodology of multiplying out something. That has been it's been very difficult to contrast with kind of 6 young PhDs in their garage bringing their dog to work that are going to build a Mach 6 aircraft to do something that's just a little skosh beyond physics. So I think that as we enter into a world where there is a serious situation in Eastern Europe, there are serious changes in strategy that may have to come to play when you look at things like air superiority and lots of other things. I think companies that can produce relevant technologies in a solid footing, in a reliable, effective way, with a pathway to solving some of these problems that we are going to face, I think right now have a much stronger position in some of the opportunities that may not have been accessible in the past. I think a lot of the companies who are looking to invest in the capital that's out there will be looking at these types of companies. And I think, all of the things I'm hearing here are kind of companies in that space where they're aligned to defense and into key technological areas that are real and don't require some extraordinary leap of faith or 6 or 7 miracles to make it happen. These are all things that can be done, and they can be done cost effectively, and they bring value to the customer base. So I'm actually looking forward. It's a little refreshing to maybe call out some of the fantasy things and get back to things that actually have merit.
I think that's well said. Well, hey, listen, I want to thank everyone for taking the time. I think this has been an outstanding conversation. So really want to thank all of our panelists. Do want to thank the folks that were able to log in and watch this session. We will have this on our website as well, and be on the lookout. I think we're having our final summer speaker panel series here in 2 weeks, so we'll be circulating some notices about that as well. So again, I'd like to thank everybody, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks much, Mitch.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much.